Hey guys, welcome back to our animal and fruit mashup project. So what we're going to be working on today is moving forward in the creation process of this project. So our last class, what we worked on was brainstorming different animals, different fruits that we could combine, and then creating thumbnails of our ideas. So this time we're going to be looking at those thumbnails, picking our favorite combination, and then doing research. So by research, I mean you need to go online and find a really nice, high quality reference photo of your animal that you picked to use as your subject and the fruit that you picked to use as your subject. So I'm going to be using an iguana and a banana to create an iguana. So I have my upside down iguana reference photo here. As you can see, it's a very clear image. It's not fuzzy. I can see like all the details. So this is a great reference photo, and I have it in black and white. So you are going to be printing a black and white version of your reference photo for you to have for when you start the drawing process, but you're going to save the color version on your laptop, your Chromebook somehow. Once you have your reference photo, you're going to be creating a grid on top. My grid was made on the computer. And from there, you're going to be creating a grid on your paper. I have this cute little paper. You guys are going to be working a lot bigger than this. For the sake of an example, my paper is very small. Okay, so the way gridding works is you are going to grid the dominant figure in your reference photo. So for me, my iguana here. So what I'm going to do right now is go ahead and grab my handy dandy ruler here, and I'm going to create my grid on my drawing paper and then get started on the sketch. Okay, so at this point, I have officially finished drawing my grid onto my drawing paper. And the important thing to note here is even though my paper is two different sizes, my grid boxes are different sizes. I have the same number of boxes going across my paper. And because I have the same number of boxes, it's going to allow me to create an accurate drawing that's guided by this grid. So from here, I'll be able to look at where my lines are in these boxes and recreate in the boxes I drew on my paper. Now, if you are someone that is less confident in your drawing abilities, you are going to want to break your grid up a lot more than I did. So you have the option to make these grid boxes as small as like 1/4 of an inch, or you could go up to like 1/2 an inch or 1 inch, whatever is going to help guide you best. The point of this grid is to help guide your proportions if you're not super great with just looking and doing at this point, which is normal for middle school. So don't stress out about that. I've had a lot of practice in this area, so I don't need quite as much guidance, but do not feel bad if you need to break it up to be much smaller to really help you figure out where all your contour lines need to be.
We can also at this point pull out tracing paper if we need a little extra help or like assistance at this point, and use that as a tool so that we are super happy and comfortable and confident with the drawing that we create, so then we can move forward and do the color pencil part and have something that we're really excited about.
Now that I have my grid, I'm going to go ahead and create my contour line drawing. Okay, so I just finished drawing out like the basic shape of my little iguana friend here. So what I did was I took my reference photo that had my grid on it, and then I used that as like my general guidelines for creating my iguana. But as you can probably tell, I didn't stick straight to my reference photo. I used it as my reference, but was not trying to do like this perfect observation drawing. I just used it to get the basics of my animal drawn. And then at the end, you can tell I've kind of already worked in where my little banana tail is going to be. So as you're drawing your iguana, or as you're drawing your animal, what you should do is have the photo reference of your animal next to you, as you could probably see me doing in the little time lapse that I did, using that to reference as you're drawing, but also have your picture of your fruit pulled up on your Chromebook or something, so you can be glancing up, looking at that, kind of figuring out how you're going to get that shape worked in with your animal. Remember, it's very important that your animal fruit mashup makes sense. So think about the way that the artists that we looked at in our slideshow worked together their fruit and their animal in a way that made sense with the anatomy of the animal. Like it kind of like fit together, almost like this like very nice like melts in, if that makes sense. Okay, now we are almost ready to start coloring, but first we need to carefully erase all our grid lines on our paper. It's really important that when you create this grid, you draw it really lightly so that when you erase the lines, they disappear easily without leaving any marks or indentations on your paper, and then you can just touch up where you're erased. Okay, now that all the grid lines are erased, we are ready to start coloring. So when using colored pencils, it's important to begin with the lightest layers of color first. This is gonna help us build depth and keep our colors looking very smooth and natural. So right now, I'm starting on my little banana tail here. I'm carefully looking at my photo reference and then identifying all the lighter shades I see and laying those down first to create a really strong base to work off of. So you can see that I'm using several different shades of yellow to do this, and that's because natural objects rarely have just one flat color. By layering different shades of yellow, I can create a more realistic and dynamic look. I'm also applying that color very gently, so I'm using a very light hand to build up layers gradually, and that's going to prevent harsh lines and going to allow us to get a smoother blend later on. Okay, now you can see me taking out a light brown pencil to start my details, and I'm using this color for my details because it's the lightest value I see for the details in my photo reference. And by details, I mean like the bruises on the banana. So adding details like the texture or bruises or whatever to both your fruit and your animal is going to make a huge difference in the way that your art comes out. So here you can see I'm kind of giving an idea of where the banana has ripened with just a quick light line drawing with that really light brown shade. And then you can see me go in and lightly start to fill in those outlines with that very light detail color. All right, so keep in mind while you're working on this part that the more detail that you get in here, the better your art is going to look when it's completely finished. So really take your time with this. Okay, now you can see I'm going into my detail work with a mid-tone, which is a nice dark brown. Again, I'm using my fruit reference and I'm letting that guide where I'm choosing to shade with that mid-tone. So you can't see it on my screen right now because my phone got pushed off to the side, but I'm consistently looking back and forth between my photo reference of my banana and then my drawing and then replicating kind of what I see with the bruises that are happening there to be able to get those mid-tones in a way that looks really accurate. All right, finally here you see me going into shade the darkest parts with a black pencil. I'm moving from shading lightest to darkest, which is always the goal when shading colored pencils, to go from the color with the lightest natural value to the darkest natural value. Also, when blending with colored pencils for a realistic effect, it's very important to use colors that transition smoothly. So analogous colors, colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, always work really well for blending because they create a very natural, seamless gradient. But another effective approach is to just follow a natural value progression. So, you watched me transition from various shades of yellow to brown to black, and that works because brown is essentially just a darker, muted version of yellow, and black naturally deepens the values, creating depth and contrast. So you can go one of two ways here. You can stick with true analogous colors for a smooth, harmonious blend, or you can follow a natural value progression like I did here. The key is to just make sure that you're building up layers gradually and making sure you always go from light to dark, and that's the most important takeaway. Now that all the colors and details are in place, it's time to blend everything together for a smooth, cohesive finish. So you can see me doing this by going back in with my lightest shade, a soft yellow, to gently layer over the other colors. So this technique helps merge the transitions between shades, softening any harsh lines and just creating a more seamless gradient. So by using the lightest color to blend, it's naturally going to lift and brighten the layers underneath and enhance the overall richness and realism of the shading. So essentially this final step is ensuring that all the tones work harmoniously together. They're giving our artwork depth, vibrancy, and just a very polished and professional look. Okay, now you see me just going ahead and finishing up the rest of my little banana. So I'm adding in some of those like mid-tones with the yellow and just finishing up the top part of the banana because I was focusing on the lower half for that demonstration. Alright, so moving on to my iguana, you'll see me applying the same light to dark shading technique that I used on the banana. So I begin by establishing the base layer with my lightest yellow and medium greens, very carefully mapping out the highlights and midtones to create a very strong foundation for me to work off of. And then I gradually introduce darker values using deep green to define those shadows, enhance the depth. And then in areas that require even stronger contrast, I add some subtle touches of black to really reinforce the darkest points while maintaining that very natural transition. So then to unify all these layers and create a really smooth, realistic blend, I go back in with my lightest green in some points and my lightest yellow in other points to really softly layer over those previous colors. And then that smooths out any harsh edges and also helps to just maintain a very natural color transition, just like I want. Okay, so it's been about an hour now and my iguana is officially complete. Okay, so basically in the creation of this, we talked about how we would do our grid work, and then we also talked about how to layer and blend our colored pencils so that we can get as realistic of a look as possible. And obviously the worksheets that we're going to be using are going to be really helpful with accomplishing this, but just good to be keeping in mind, we want to start with our lightest colors and layer and then blend, always working from light to dark because it's a whole lot easier to make things darker than to make things lighter after you already made them too dark. So good thing to keep in mind while you're working, but this is just a little close-up of what I have going on. My cutie little iguana with his little tail, all the fun little texture details on his skin, all of those things in the moment might look difficult, but are actually fairly simple as long as you're following that light to dark process. So with that said, best of luck. Now it's your turn. Bye guys.